Welcome to Shameless Leadership. I'm your host, Sarah Dean. This show is for women leaders who are committed to advancing both their own leadership and the leadership of those around them. In each episode, I offer practical strategies and inspiring stories to help you become a more confident, compassionate, and curious leader. The truth is, you were born to lead. So let's start now, together. Hello, Shameless Leaders. I'm thrilled to be here with you today for another episode of the Shameless Leadership Podcast. And today we're going to do something I don't think I've ever done before. We're going to talk about a TV show. I don't think I've ever centered a whole episode around a TV show, but my only reference to TV shows has probably been like watching Real Housewives as a relaxation exercise. But I'm going to talk today about an episode of Survivor that my husband and I watched recently. And I realize that in talking about this, I'm outing myself as one of 5 to 7 people in the world who still watches Survivor after 48 seasons. So there's that. But the other thing is, I don't want you to be like, hold on, I don't watch Survivor, so this doesn't matter, because that's absolutely not true. So if you have never seen an episode of Survivor before, all good. The lessons learned from this story are what's important here. So you don't need to be a fan of the show or even understand the show to understand what happened in this particular episode that is just an entire masterclass in leadership and inclusion. So Survivor's in season 48, I believe. And in 48 seasons, I think I've seen all except for the first 2 or so, because my husband and I started watching together when we met 22 years ago. And I had watched a couple seasons before that, but then I missed a couple. Then I met him in 2003. We started watching together. I've literally never missed an episode. Again, one of 5 to 7 people in the world who can say that. So this season on Survivor, and I should say even before this season, one of the things I've noticed over time is some real intentionality with the show to be to really center representation, which has been really cool to see. And then also to be thoughtful and intentional around how they have conversations about certain topics and how they really do create space for hard conversations at times. And they've had conversations about race, about sexuality, about gender identity. They aren't afraid to dig into tough subjects. And it's been interesting to me, especially as I've grown in leadership, to really pay attention to how production creates space for these conversations. And then also how contestants on a reality show either can or cannot hold space for for hard conversations, and either can or cannot create safety and build trust with their teammates. And what's been interesting this season is that there's been a couple things that have come up with a couple of contestants that are very new and nuanced. And I've really been taking in how the cast has been dealing with them, how production has edited the episodes, the kind of time and space production gives to certain topics, and then also how Jeff Probst, the host of the show, how he digs into this. So the first thing that happened early in the season, which is I felt like kind of a precursor for what was to come, but had no idea at the time. So the first thing that happened was there is a contestant, a person on the show named Mitch, and he's amazing, really athletic and smart and talented and funny and really great guy. My whole family we're team Mitch. But he has a speech impediment, so he has a stutter. And this is pretty noticeable. As soon as they have him on camera, you can see him struggling to get words out from time to time, and that sometimes it just takes a couple attempts, and it can take a little long. He needs a moment to try a word more than one time in many cases, and that no one around him ever tries to hurry him or ever tries to say words for him, or kind of get there faster for him. And at one point, Jeff Probst, the host of the show, said in one of the early episodes, he said, "Hey, I just want to check in. When you're speaking and you're trying to get a word out and you're stumbling on something, is it helpful if people try to pitch in and finish words or sentences for you? Or would you prefer that we give you space to do that on your own?" And Mitch was like, "Thank you so much for asking. I really appreciate that. And I absolutely would much prefer that you give me the time and the space to get words out on my own." And I thought this was such a great thing that Jeff asked that, but also that production and post-production, that they decided we're going to air this conversation, because this is something that anyone can do anywhere, where you are in an environment, you see someone who engages in the world in a way different than you or has a different ability than you. And you might have this temptation to jump in and rescue, and that person does not want to be rescued. And so Jeff's question, I thought, was so thoughtful and perfect. And hearing Mitch's response, where he was like, please don't rescue me. I'm a grown man and I want to speak for myself. So that was kind of the first thing that happened, where I was like, oh, I'm liking this season. And then shortly after that, there's a contestant, Ava. And Ava, she was super athletic, really smart. Just from the beginning, you were like, she's going to be a strong contender. She, early on in the show, to camera shares that she has autism, and she's fairly young, I think in her maybe early 20s. So Eva shares that she has autism. And then she says that she feels like she needs to have one other cast member that she can confide in, because she feels like she knows herself well enough to know that at some point she's probably going to need to lean on someone. And she wants someone to know in advance so that they can kind of be set up to have her back in a moment where she might really need extra support, which I thought was really smart of her and really thoughtful and even strategic. So I love that she has this conversation to camera, but no one else around can hear it. So the other contestants on the show don't know this. She ends up confiding in another player named Joe, and Joe is just like awesome dad energy. I was like, Joe was so the right choice. Like Eva kind of watched Joe for a few days and then was like, okay, like I can trust him. He is a safe person. He's the right person to go to with this. So she goes and she tells Joe, like, hey, Joe, I just wanted to fill you in. I have autism. I've known since I was really, really young. I've overcome a lot of things. I don't want everyone on the show to know, but I do want one person to know. It feels important to me that one person knows, because there might be a time when I need support or need someone to lean on. And it's important to me to be, kind of set that up in advance, build up a relationship in advance with a safe person. And Joe was just like, amazing. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you came to me. You picked the right person for the job. And he was just incredible. So Joe and Eva, they have this amazing relationship throughout the game. And no one else knows this is happening, though. No one else kind of knows that they've had this conversation and that Joe is really keeping this watchful eye on Eva. So in last week's episode, so this is where it all comes together. In last week's episode, they're all divided up into teams and they're doing this challenge, and the challenges are always a combination of like physical endurance and mental stamina, and a combination between like having to work really hard physically, but then usually like brain puzzle kinds of things. So Eva's doing her part of the challenge for her team, and she gets stuck on this one component of the challenge, and she keeps attempting it and failing it. And it's like she's having to roll a ball through this wooden maze thing, and she has to manipulate the maze. It's on a large wooden platform, and she has to manipulate the maze with her hands in order to roll the ball through the whole thing to get it from one end to the other, and then drop it into this little hole. And so she keeps trying, and the ball keeps falling off of the course, and she keeps having to start over. And many people are experiencing this in the game, and many people are getting frustrated. Like, she's certainly not alone. But over time, you can see that she just is mentally really becoming very overwhelmed, mentally and emotionally. And she's really losing her confidence. And she has a lot of physical confidence in other challenges. And so this is kind of the first time we're seeing her lose some of that confidence. So this is where I start paying attention. I'm like, what are people going to do? As she starts to lose confidence, she becomes more and more emotional. And you can just see her, as you see with anyone who just feels like they've let themselves down and let other people down. You can see the emotional overwhelm really getting to her and really impacting her ability to keep going. So she's being really hard on herself. She's really mad. The emotion on her face and the expression on her face just really shows how disappointed she is in herself. And what's interesting in this moment is that her team doesn't get impatient with her. And there's times on Survivor, like all the time, where people get impatient. They're like, just do it this way and just do it that way. And no one gets impatient. They know nothing about her neurodiversity, and yet they know that this is a time to just stand by. So they don't get impatient at all. They're just cheering for her. They're like, you got it. And then at one point, one of her teammates says, Eva, her teammate is Mary. And Mary says, Eva, I need you to say to yourself, I can do this. You need to say that out loud right now. And so Eva's like, okay, I can do this. She's crying. You can see her anger on her and frustration on her face. And she said, I can do this. And Mary's like, good job, Eva. You can do this. And so they're like, Mary's kind of coaching her, which I thought was a really powerful moment. So Eva eventually, Joe's eyes are just locked on Eva. They're on opposing teams. They're across this big field that the challenge is in. But Joe's eyes are just locked on her. Like it was like this very protective instinct. And what I appreciated about it was that his eyes were locked on her, I felt like, so that if at any moment she were to turn to him to be like, I need you, that he would immediately be there to say, I got you. He was so ready. But he also was not jumping in. He wasn't cheering for her across teams because they were, opponents in this situation. So he wasn't cheering for her. He wasn't going over to rescue her. He was just like eyes on her. She eventually finishes her part of the challenge. And then when she finishes, her like excitement and also I think just overwhelming relief of finishing something that felt so impossible causes this just her to become completely emotionally overwhelmed. And she's crying, starting to hyperventilate. She can't catch her breath. She's just very visibly, physically and emotionally distraught. And her teammates are all hugging for her and they're excited for her. And remember, they don't know that she has autism. So they're just like, they're really proud of her and they're in this moment with her. And when they step back for a minute and they're trying to help her catch her breath and they're like trying to kind of help her re-regulate, we then hear Jeff Probst say to Joe, do you want to go over and talk to Eva? And this is really the first time this has ever happened in 48 seasons, where they invite someone from one team to the opposing team to say like, hey, do you want to go help this person out? And Joe says yes. And he goes over and he says to Eva, he says, can I hug you? And she says yes. So he gives her this big bear hug. And then after they hug for a moment, then he kind of steps back a bit and he grabs her hands and he's like, I'm going to hold your hands right now. And he's holding her hands and they're looking at each other and he's like, you're okay, you're safe, you're okay, you're safe. And you can see Eva starting to re-regulate, starting to be able to catch her breath, starting to be able to calm down her emotions, starting to become more present in her body, present in the situation. And so then when she finally, when Eva's finally able to, re-regulate herself and Joe's able to kind of step back and give the moment back to Eva, then Jeff says like, hey, do you want to share anything about what's happening right now? And then Eva takes that opportunity to share with everyone that she has autism and that this is what happens sometimes, is that she has these really emotionally overwhelming experiences where she gets flooded with emotion. And she called it an episode. So she said, I have these episodes and I knew that sooner or later out here, I would probably have an episode and I needed to have someone who could have my back in that moment. So I told Joe a while ago that I have autism and that if I need him, like I wanted him to be my person. So at that point, everyone's really, they're just happy for Eva that she feels like she can share. I think they're really proud of her for sticking with it. I mean, she just showed like such relentlessness and tenacity and courage in that moment. But what I thought about afterwards were a handful of things that came out of that episode and that moment in that episode that I thought were really, really key that I want to talk about in terms of how they relate to ways that any of us can be more inclusive, because we're always around people that we don't know what their layers of identity are. We don't know what their needs are. We don't know why they might be having a reaction in a situation that makes no sense to us because they're experiencing the situation in a way that we didn't experience the situation. And maybe it's because of something that happened earlier in that day. Maybe it's because of something going on at home. Maybe it's because of something that's happening within them, a PTSD response, or maybe because of neurodiversity, or maybe they have ADHD, or maybe they have anxiety. Like there's a million reasons that people react to different things in different ways. And there's so many things that we can do to create safe environments for people to process in a way that is meaningful to them, to give them the space that they need, to ask for consent before we jump in. So those are the things that I want to dig into. So 5 lessons that I want to talk about from this moment, from this situation. So the first one is about patience. And so the first thing that I really noticed during this challenge was how patient Eva's team was with her. They were just so patient and supportive, and they weren't frustrated with her. They weren't mad at her. They weren't rolling their eyes. They weren't showing any signs of distress, even though she was very distressed. They were just like, we're here for you. We got you. Take the time that you need. That's really different than in a lot of competitive environments, right? In a lot of team environments. Sometimes we get really frustrated, visibly frustrated. We don't understand why someone else isn't getting something that maybe came more easily to us. And we might get visibly frustrated or mad or angry, and we might start blaming. So The team's patience was incredible. The other piece of the team's patience was also Mary's coaching, which I talked about, where Mary was really like, hey, I believe in you. I want you to, you need to believe in yourself. I need you to say, I can do this. And like really giving her a tool that she could use in that moment to refocus her energy and really interrupt some of her negative self-talk. So that was number one. How can you be more patient in moments where someone might be processing or experiencing something differently than you? And then if there's the chance to give them support, how can you do that in a way that's meaningful to them, that shows that you believe in them, that gives them something that they can really use tactically in that moment? The second piece, the second element or lesson was Joe and Joe's ability to be in that moment with Eva, even from afar. And so this was demonstrated in his eye contact, his ability to just like keep his eyes on her in this moment, knowing that I want her to know that I'm right here if she needs anything, that if her eyes glance in my direction, that she will see, I got you. So for you all who you know could use your support in stressful times or in moments of high pressure, how are you keeping eyes on people so that if they give you that kind of split second, like, oh my gosh, look, that you can be like, hey, I got you. Like, what do you need? I'm here. And the second part of this lesson is not just being there, but asking for consent before you step in, which Joe did so beautifully. So he didn't run over to rescue her. He waited until there was a moment where it made sense for him to intervene and participate in this moment and kind of show up for Eva. And then he asked, he was like, hey, can I hug you? And then she said yes. And so like he really waited to meet her in that moment rather than taking the moment from her or rather than rescuing her. And so when she was able to finish the challenge and when she was able to lean on Joe and work through her emotions, it was really about how she got through that rather than about how Joe jumped in and did it for her. And I think especially for parents sometimes, if we're parents in our outside of work life, it's so easy to just want to jump in and be like, I got you. Like, let me just do it for you. I don't want to see you suffer, whether this is with our kids or maybe a vulnerable team member. But is the power in really letting someone figure something out, knowing that you are right there if they need something. And then if you do get yourself involved, that control to say, that self-control, especially if you like to jump into things, that self-control to ask for consent before you rescue, to say like, hey, would this be helpful? Rather than just assuming that you know what someone needs or assuming that this is the moment that someone needs you and you should jump in. The third lesson was around how Jeff Probst, the host, reacted to the situation. So he modeled vulnerability in a really powerful way. And I want to bring this back to the situation with the contestant Mitch with his stuttering, and then also Jeff's reaction in this moment here with Eva. So in both situations, he was very non-judgmental and he asked simple questions like, hey, how do you feel about this? Would you prefer this or this? Would it be okay if we did this? So he didn't make any assumptions. He didn't jump in and speak for anyone. He didn't go in and solve a problem for someone. He instead said like, hey, what's your preference in this situation? Or would you like Joe to come say hi? Like he asked for consent along the way, but he also was able to do this in a way that was vulnerable, saying like, hey, I don't know the right thing right now for you. So I want to admit my vulnerability and to let my arm or my guard down to let you know that I really want to see you in this moment and hold space in whatever way is most meaningful to you. So what would that be? And then waiting for the appropriate response. He also, in the moment with Eva, was emotional. I've never in 48 seasons, I've never seen Jeff Probst cry. And the contestants said the same thing. They were like, whoa, like Eva made Jeff cry. It was a big moment. But he modeled this vulnerability that really showed his compassion and his empathy that I thought was really powerful. And when we let our guard down as leaders, especially when we're in positions where like we've been the ultimate leader for a long time, as Jeff has been for 48 seasons on Survivor. But when we're in these situations where people really kind of see us as like the unbreakable face of something or the strong centered person where we can model that vulnerability and say like, hey, I'm not totally sure how to show up right now. I'm not totally sure what's best right here. I want to check in with you. That vulnerability, that stepping out of our ego, that our ability to really center someone else and be like, hey, like, this is about you, not about me. You tell me what you need, is so powerful and so, such a strong indication of a great leader. I think also a really important way for us to be building relationships in leadership. The trust that you build when you can do that, when you can show up and put your ego aside, model that vulnerability and be like, hey, I want to be in this moment with you and I don't want to get it wrong, or I want to make sure that I'm giving you what you need rather than trying to center my own needs, I think is so critical. The fourth lesson of the situation was consistently creating safety. So contestants, you go into Survivor and everything is very raw and vulnerable, and like you're starving, you have very few supplies to keep you alive, very little food, if any, very few clothes. All your basic needs are pretty much unmet the whole time you're out there. And the way that these team members were able to consistently create safety, and it was a combination of the team members, Jeff as the host, and then the production crew, so that they were able to create safety in a way that when someone needed something, they were able to speak up for themselves. They were able to say what they needed. They were able to really be honest and vulnerable about what they needed in a moment, and share pieces of themselves and what makes them different, that in ways that were meaningful to them, but also ways that were meaningful to everyone else in the room, which continued then to build safety and trust within that environment. After I watched the episode, I was like, I want to write about this on LinkedIn. I want to write about it on social. I was just so touched by the whole thing. And as I thought about it for a couple of days, I started writing some notes, and then I got on LinkedIn on Monday, and this other woman had written this gorgeous post. And so I ended up sharing her post. If you follow me on LinkedIn at sarahdean.com/LinkedIn, I shared her post there, but there was one piece that she mentioned, and she showed a video clip of this episode. There was one thing that she said in her post that I wanted to share here because I think it's really important around consistently creating safety. So this leader's name is, and I'm hoping I'm saying her name right, Ligia Coyen Ramos is the person on LinkedIn. And I will link to her profile in my show notes here. But she said, sometimes the difference between panic and peace, between danger and recovery, lies in our ability to simply be there without judgment, without pressure. And I thought that was so powerful and beautiful, that when other people are maybe feeling unsafe or feel extra vulnerable, or more vulnerable than we do at least, that there's this space where we can sit, where we can be there for them, so that when they're in an extreme, where they're experiencing danger or panic, that we can sit and be that grounding force that's like, hey, I'm here with you. I got you. I'm going to stay here. I'm okay here. I'm not scared to be here with you. And that we can do that without judgment and without pressure, without like a hurry up, let's move on. Just like, hey, I'm here with you for however long it takes. That was modeled so beautifully. And when we model that in the places where we are leading, then people will assume safety. And when people assume safety, what happens? They are more productive and effective and efficient, and they get to be the best versions of themselves, which means they produce the best stuff from their gifts, right? So everybody wins. Without that safety, if we go to panic with the person who's panicking, or if we, jump into that danger, I'm scared too, or I don't know how to hold space for you, or like just getting, if our emotions become overwhelming on top of theirs, or we're pressuring them to hurry up or do it my way or do it this way, or you're not, how come you can't get it? If we're putting that kind of pressure and judgment on it, then we're constantly eroding the safety. And that impacts all the long-term outcomes. It impacts all the ways that we show up. It impacts everything that we're able to do in collaborative spaces, in places where we spend time together. So really thinking through how we can be consistently creating safety by being in those spaces between panic and peace, between danger and recovery, without judgment, without pressure, the simplicity of just being there and being present when someone needs us to be present for them. And then the fifth lesson was really about values demonstration. So I was thinking about this after the fact. Obviously, I thought about this a lot. And one of the things I was thinking about was specifically around production. So usually in any episode, especially in reality TV, you'll hear statistics, and I don't know the exact statistics, but like for every hour of reality TV that you see on TV, it's like, 60 hours of actual footage that they pare down into 60 minutes or 42 minutes with commercials. So We know that Survivor as a business, Survivor as a their production team, they constantly are making decisions around like, what are we going to show? How long are we going to show it for? What do we give airspace to? And this was one of the longer segments I've seen. I mean, it might have been like the longest kind of debriefing after a challenge that I've ever seen in 48 episodes over 24 years. And I thought that this was a really impactful demonstration of values, that they're saying that we value human dignity and we value representation so much that we're going to give this significantly more time than we usually give at the end of a challenge, or that we usually give when someone's struggling, or that we usually give when someone has a triumphant moment, or that we usually give when teammates are, or even adversaries on opposite teams are connecting with one another. That they decided that they were going to really give this a lot of time because it was important. And when you have that major demonstration of values and upholding human dignity in that way, you don't even need the frickin' plaque on the wall that says your values. And I was thinking about this too, that like, I don't think Survivor ever anywhere has been like, hey, here's our DEI values. But when you watch the show, you see who's represented. You see how they let the people who are representing all sorts of marginalized identities take up space and talk about the ways that they endure and engage in the world. And that's the values. They don't need a value statement splashed across the bottom of the screen or on their website or on a plaque on the wall in Survivor Land, because they're just showing it in terms of what they're deciding, how they edit, and what they let us see, and that they let us see these kinds of moments. So my questions for you, after listening to my whole Survivor breakdown, is how can you apply this? Like, what does this mean for you? Does this mean you need to go watch Survivor? I don't care if you go watch Survivor. This particular episode was amazing. If you just Google Survivor season 48 Eva, you'll be able to find clips of it. But what does this mean for you in terms of how you can show up as a leader, in terms of how you can ask yourself questions to do better when it comes to being inclusive? So a couple questions and invitations for you. First, how does your behavior demonstrate your values? How does the way that you engage in different spaces, does the way that you just show up on a routine basis, how does that demonstrate your values? So that you don't need to have, again, like carrying around a plaque or putting up a plaque in your office, like, these are my core values. Great if you have that, but how are you also acting in a way that that's not even necessary because people just know? My second question for you is how can you show your commitment to inclusion no matter what words become quote unquote illegal, or how society is getting stuck on ridiculous semantics in this moment in time? How can you show your value and your commitment to inclusion and to human dignity and to valuing the inherent worth of every person that you work with no matter what words we are no longer allowed to say or put in emails or put on our websites or have in company memos? My next question for you is how are you considering other people's visible and invisible components of identity before you pass judgment? We've all been in situations where we see someone struggling and we jump to conclusions. We're like, oh my gosh, why are they being such a pain? Oh my gosh, can't they try harder? Like, we've all been there. How are you considering other people's visible and invisible components of identity and layers of identity before you pass judgment, before you get annoyed, before you get frustrated? I catch myself in this like all the time at the grocery store where the person in front of me is taking a long time and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is happening? I'm like climbing out of my skin. And then, then they get out a checkbook and they're going to write a check. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how are we here? And to be able to sit back and be like, hold on, like, how am I making this moment about me when it might be is really about someone else's vulnerability? What am I missing here? And then last question for you is how are you holding space in a way that builds trust and safety so that when someone needs something, like Mitch did or like Eva did, that they can ask for it and receive the support that they need? So how are you holding space so that you're building trust and safety all along, so that when someone needs something, they're not scared that they're going to be abandoned. They don't panic and just leave. This happens all the time in workplaces where someone doesn't know how to ask for the right support because they don't feel safe enough, that they would rather quit their job than ask for the support that they need. I have a great friend who does a lot of work with trans people in the workforce, and she talks a lot about people who are non-binary and people who are transgender, instead of transitioning their voice or transitioning at work, that they will leave jobs because they feel so unsafe to be able to do that in their work environment. So they would rather, behind closed doors, make a shift in how they show up to the world in terms of their identity, instead of being able to do that in a way that's visible, because the stakes feel so high. It feels so dangerous. So how are you holding space so that when people need something, or people are going through something, or they need to be seen in a different way that's more vulnerable to them, that maybe you haven't seen before, that they can ask for what they need and they can assume that you will be supportive? Because again, that's just who you are. That's how you consistently demonstrate your values. So I hope this episode has been helpful. I hope you feel a little inspired. Maybe you'll go watch Survivor. I don't care if you do or not. They're not a sponsor. But I loved this episode and I just love these lessons. And I hope that they're meaningful to you in terms of how you consider your own work in inclusion in this time, in this season. Thank you for being here. I can't wait to be back with you next week. And until then, know that I'm in this with you always. Thank you for allowing me to spend time in your ear today. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe to this channel. To learn more about my speaking, training, and coaching services, visit sarahdean.com. That's SARADEAN. I would also love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn at sarahdean.com/LinkedIn or on Instagram at sarahdeanspeaks. I love hearing from my listeners. Thank you for showing up for yourself today. I see you, I hear you, and I'm holding space for you today and every single day.